Okay, should I get going, Helen?
Yes.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. My name is Allison McNeil, and on behalf of Helen Conroy and the rest of the Thinking Moms Revolution, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Gut-Brain Injury, How, Why, and What You Can Do About It, a conversation about Restore. We will be giving away two 32-ounce bottles of Restore today. And if you're watching live, you're eligible to win. And we are drawing winners randomly. And our first winner is Helen. Has just given me a name. The first winner is Yvette Lewis. Congratulations, Yvette. And I will be emailing you about your prize. In today's webinar, Dr. Bush will demonstrate the unifying science behind the devastating changes in the food, farming, and medical industries, and introduce the breakthrough science of bacteria and their communication with the body's defense systems. While at Autism One this year, most of TMR was unable to attend Dr. Bush's lecture due to scheduling conflict. He was kind enough to offer us an hour of his time, which turned into 2 hours, to explain Restore and how it works. We were impressed not only with the science behind this product, but also with Dr. Bush's compassion and genuine concern for our kids and the struggles that autism families face while trying to heal their children. Dr. Bush is one of the few triple board certified physicians in the U.S. with specialties in internal medicine, endocrinology, and palliative care. His achievements include award-winning cell biology, clinical care, and medical education. He is the founder of Revolution Health Center in Scottsville, Virginia, and is the CEO of Biomic Sciences, the team that has brought forth the novel science and product line Restore, which we are going to hear about today. Dr. Bush is going to talk for about 40 minutes, and then we will have approximately 20 minutes for questions. You may enter questions throughout the presentation, and Dr. Bush will take them at the end of his talk. So welcome, Dr. Bush. I'm very much looking forward to hearing you talk today. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Allison, and thank you for the introduction there. And greetings to all the moms that have tuned in and all the moms that will see this subsequently there. It was a real emotional and wonderful time for us to get to know the Thinking Moms Revolution, the leadership there, and all of the moms that attended Autism One up in Chicago were just a powerful group of consumers that have really gone above and beyond the call of duty in really pursuing optimal health for your children when so few options for help have come from our Western medical system. You guys have really been in pursuit of real health and have really never given up hope on that expectation for your children. And that's just a really impressive thing to behold as a doctor, let alone just another consumer out in the world. It's inspirational to be around all of you, and real hats off to the entire group and what you guys have done for advocacy for the world community, and really starting to plow a totally different approach to optimal health for your children as you've taught yourself nutrition and supplementation and spent thousands of hours reading and exploring your own avenues towards a pursuit of health for your children. It's an impressive feat. So we're excited to give you more data today and help you understand a completely new tool that's in your repertoire now to add to the powerful tools and resources that you've already found. We're excited for you to see how this really synergizes with all the other successful interventions that you've already made and really lays a new foundation for future interventions, whether it's physical therapy, nutrition, and all the others, or other supplementation to come. I think that you're going to find out that the bacteria in your gut here really have magic to work in your whole family, including your children with autism. So we're going to jump in here and take a look across the board how this is all going to fit together. But as we look at the human biome and we start to try to understand where we're going to go, I'm going to make a note here that Allison or Helen, I'm not able to flip through the slides yet, but I think it's just maybe switching over here. But if you can advance the slide for me, whoever's got the mouse on, advance that slide there. But historically, as the slides catch up with us here, we've all had a real good sense that nutrition and our connection to our greater nature at large is really where health is going to flow from. And our current society has been taking major strides away from that connection to nature, really after one pursuit, which is the pursuit of comfort. And so everything from our clothing that we now wear to the rubber-soled shoes that are on our feet that insulate us from Earth's electrical charge that has such amazing healing potential, to our air-conditioned facilities, whether it's homes or schools or our clinics or wherever they are, the artificial air environment, etc., has all led to these separations from nature. And we've suffered as a species as we've separated ourselves from that nature. And nowhere is that more obvious than in this environment of bacteria that we're going to discuss today. Western medicine has really lost track of that kind of connectivity concept, not just in the macro system, but even in the micro system of our bodies. We've so forgotten that there's a large ecosystem afoot, and we really start to study disease in an organ-specific fashion, and we subspecialize into these little tiny niches of medicine in which an organ, the heart or the lungs or the kidneys, become our specialty. And that, of course, leads to complete breakdown in our education as to how does health happen and where's the science of health. And so the science of health is really not discussed at all during the 17 years of medical education that I went through and everything else. It was all disease-oriented, and we were given a huge toolbox of drugs which were there for chronic disease management. We're really not getting at the root cause of what most of us would want as consumers, which is health. And so this science of health is what we've been really working on in our clinic over the last 5 years, and in our basic science laboratory, starting to really look at health under the microscope instead of disease under the microscope. And we've learned a lot. But if we take a look at what's happened as we've lost track of the health, it's been pretty dismal. So USA currently ranks 49th in health outcomes in the world. We're now surpassed by Croatia and a lot of the developing world who are having better health outcomes than we are. And that includes, importantly, children's health and pediatric health. As you guys are all very exquisitely aware right now, autism has now hit 1 in 68 as a prevalence in birth rates here in the United States. That is actually already an old statistics that's based on birth information and disease prevalence probably from 2 years ago, so we're probably closer to 1 out of 60 or even below that now. And so the number's been changing rapidly over the years. But that pales in comparison to some of the other epidemics that our children are now facing as they move towards adulthood, with diabetes hitting 1 in 4, obesity 1 in 3, major depression prevalence in adults in America as of 2000 was already at 1 in 2. 100 years previous, the prevalence rate had been 1 in 100. So you can see the massive changes we've had in disease prevalence just over the last 100 years have been daunting. Just in the last year, making big headlines is the cancer rate in adults is now hitting 1 in 2. 49% of American adults will be diagnosed with some sort of cancer before they die. And so our epidemics are massive. And so as we've started to turn our questions towards why is this disease prevalence happening, why are we in epidemics of almost every chronic disease ever described, what is the root cause of all of this? One prevalent answer keeps coming to the top of all the literature and all the science that's done out there. And that one cause is inflammation. And inflammation is really that root cause of chronic disorder or disease. And everything we think of as organ-specific, from pulmonary disease to cardiovascular disease to autism, all of these are stemming from some sort of dysregulation of your immune system and resulting inflammation. Over the last 3 or 4 years, you've probably been aware that almost every week now there's something new in the literature around the role of bacteria and its relationship to us. And that ecosystem of huge biome or ecosystem of bacteria is starting to predict disease outcomes in individuals. So big articles started coming out initially around diabetes and obesity, but now we have same reports coming out about asthma, allergy, autoimmunity, cancers, dementia, and even autism, that there's bacterial species in the gut that are predicting these disease patterns. And so as we see that bacterial change in the gut and see stemming from that chronic inflammation, it led our group down the avenue of what is the root of the root? What is the root cause of that inflammation, and how is it related to the bacteria of your gut? How can the bacteria in your gut predict the diseases that are going to be manifested in the big human? And so the bacteria really gaining traction is kind of the root of the root. And that's where we've been focused, is what is the relationship between those bacteria and your gut? What is the relationship between your bacteria and your gut immunity? What is the relationship between the bacteria and ultimately the diseases that will come from that chronic inflammation as the immune system breaks down? And so that root of the root cause turns out to really tie into an amazing story of what inflammation is as at its source. And so I take a second here just to talk about the difference between acute inflammation and chronic inflammation. Acute inflammation is actually life-saving on a daily basis. If you have an acute injury, whether it's a small fracture in the bone while you're running down the stairs, just small impact exercise that can cause thousands of fractures to happen in the bone, which are healthy events in which an inflammatory process starts to rebuild bone. You get remodeling, you actually get stronger bone after a day of impact exercise from that acute inflammation and injury repair. It also does infection control, so if you were to get a cut in the skin or something like that, really rapid recovery of that is expected through the beneficial effects of acute inflammation. In contrast, chronic inflammation is a totally different process in which there's a lack of communication happening in the cells, and as the inflammation mounts, you start to exceed your body's capacity for dealing with inflammation, and you start to get into a snowball effect where more and more inflammation builds on itself. This is often referred to as oxidative stress, where your immune system is now actually causing the injury and causing a second immune response, and then there's another injury, and so forth and so forth. So you have this positive feedback loop in which the inflammation is rolling. And so that shutdown and overwhelm of the antioxidant system of chronic inflammation is really defined now, I think accurately in our group here, as a loss of communication. So if you're going to define chronic inflammation, it is a loss of communication at the cell level. And that, we believe, is taking us to the root of the root cause. It turns out that bacteria talk, and this is our big discovery back in 2012 as we were going through a bunch of soil science at the time, and discovered a molecule in a white paper from Soil Agricultural Science that has a large molecule pictured in the middle of the screen, which is one of over 1 million different variants that can happen. But this little variant was in a white paper, and it looks a lot like the molecule I was studying at the University of Virginia when I was doing cancer research, except it's about 15 times larger. And so this large molecule I pretty quickly recognized was going to have some pretty potent anti-inflammatory and anti-cancer effects, and so we started research on that. And that's led to a whole discovery that, in fact, these molecules are being made by the bacteria. And in the making of these molecules, the bacteria are actually producing a communication network between the species. A healthy gut is estimated to have somewhere between 20 and 30,000 species, which is a biodiversity that you would see in something like a coral reef or a really healthy rainforest. And so these huge, rich biomes that we see around the Earth on the macro level are then really reproduced in a healthy human gut, where you have this booming biodiversity happening. And so what we were trying to really reproduce in you and your children is this booming biome that creates a huge communication network of these carbon molecules. These carbon molecules are made by each species of the bacteria uniquely. And so if you have 5,000 species or 500 species of bacteria, they're going to have a limited communication production. You're going to have a limited variety of these carbon molecules. And so in the end, you truncate that communication effort. If you have a booming biome and you're up there at the ecosystem of a coral reef or something like that, and you get the 30,000 species, at that point you're making somewhere around 1 million different variants of these carbon molecules, and the communication is fluent and it's really ready to deal with adversity. And so one of our colleagues has termed these the carbon snowflakes, and that's really accurate, that there's just a vast array potential of the sheer number of different carbon-based molecules that you can get through the bacterial digestive process in a healthy gut. And so these snowflakes, these carbon snowflakes, are what we've actually been able to isolate now and turn into the dietary supplement, which is now known as Restore. But that science really started in a theoretical discussion about food and nutrition and how it has its impact on our gut. So if we've now kind of all come to terms with the fact that the bacteria can talk and they can send signals between each other and send signal into the human body. The question is, in an autistic kiddo, what is happening and what are their bacteria saying? And this brings up a medical term of dysbiosis. So dysbiosis is really a description of a broken ecosystem. This is really a description of monoculture. And as you guys know, our soil and our factory farming and our antibiotic use and everything else that we've poured into our food chain over these last many decades has really narrowed the number of bacteria that we have around us. And that leads to something similar to what would happen if you dig up your whole garden, turn all of that soil over, and then let it sit out there untouched for 3 months. All you're going to end up with is a bunch of weeds. And that's the same thing that happens when you clear cut the gut with antibiotics and pesticides and herbicides in the food, etc. You're clear cutting the bacteria, and what's going to crop up are the weed-like bacteria that grow back easily in that clear cut environment. And so you end up with things like the yeast, the candida, the klebsiella, the clostridium difficile, many of these kind of pathogenic, invasive weed-like bacteria set up shop, and they can take over the biome. And with that, you get a lack of communication down at that cellular level as you're going through the system. And so as we start to talk about human health, we really have to look back towards what is the bigger picture, what is the extreme ecosystem looking like outside of the body, and how does that impact our smaller ecosystem. Western medicine has started to finally embrace probiotics, but unfortunately the probiotics are way too small of a drop in the bucket when you're talking about optimal bowel health. A probiotic typically will have between 3 and 24 species represented in billions and billions of copies. And so you might have 335 billion copies of a single bacteria in a probiotic. When you take a probiotic every single day, you end up creating more and more monoculture. So you've crowded out the weeds, so you may not have as much candida and klebsiella and all of that. So the individual may feel a bit better, but in the end they have done nothing to really promote a really diverse gut system that's going to be able to create that biodiversity of 20, 30,000 species. And so as we start to talk about gut recovery and the use of Restore, we usually stop probiotics to allow that monoculture to disappear and replace that with a real diverse system of bacteria. So if you end up with a monoculture, whether it's weeds or probiotics, you get a limited vocabulary and you get a limited defense system. If you've got that optimal bowel ecology of 20,000 species, you really get that fluid communication and a strong defense system built. And our science around Restore has really gotten down to the root of the root of the root cause. So if we acknowledge that bacteria and the death of bacteria is bad for us, the question is how and why. Why is a lack of bacteria in the gut leading to all of these problems systemically? And the answer to that, if we can call that the root of the root of the root cause of inflammation, comes down to these little tiny structures in the bowel wall. And these are called tight junctions. And this is really where our science has really leapt forward over the last couple of years under the direction of Dr. John Gilday, our Chief Science Advisor. Dr. Gilday has been showing the impact of these carbon snowflakes that are in Restore on these tight junctions and how it rebuilds this front line of defense of the body. The tight junctions lace together every single cell that runs from your sinuses and your nasal mucosa all the way to your rectum. The surface area of the entire gut there, which would include the sinuses, the oral mucosa of the mouth, the esophagus, the stomach, small intestine, large intestine, the surface area there that if spread out would cover about 2 tennis courts. So it's a massive surface area potential. As it turns out, if you're lacking these carbon molecules, that whole defense mechanism becomes raw. And that rawness is, you can almost picture a wire brush being scraped across that whole two tennis courts, and then you go to eat something, and you no longer have your barrier system up and running. You're just a sieve that's seeping all of the material that you've put in your mouth into your bloodstream and into the immune system that sits between your gut and the bloodstream there. And so this tight junction defense system, or front line of defense, is a really critical piece of your overall health, and certainly is a big story as to how autism starts to happen. And so these tight junctions are represented in dense structure along the lining of the gut walls to protect you as your front line. but then they also line all of the other systems of the body. And so the blood vessels of the throughout your whole body, and most importantly at the blood-brain barrier, you have very dense quantities of these tight junctions. And so it's the front line of defense at your gut, but then it's also the front line at the blood vessel, at the blood-brain barrier, at the kidney. You can go through the whole system. You've got line after line after line of defenses of these tight junctions. And so as we've lost bacteria, these tight junctions have become vulnerable to injury. And that injury is really being played out now at the soil level. As we destroyed our soil in the 1950s, really coming out of World War II, we lost bacterial diversity in the soil. And then we went to sodium phosphorus fertilizers, and we started to kill, or nitrogen fertilizers rather. As those developed, we killed biodiversity, we stopped composting, etc. As that happened, we lost nutrient density in our food, and with the nutrient density loss in our food, we went to monoculture on the plate. That led to a loss of gut biome in the intestines. With that kind of monoculture happening in the gut, we lost the carbon snowflakes. With the loss of the carbon snowflakes, we developed tight junction vulnerability. Then at the same time, amazingly, we developed the perfect toxin to the tight junction. So we created vulnerable tight junctions with the loss of bacteria, and now we create the perfect toxin. There's two that are common in the diet that destroy that tight junction. And the first one is refined gluten. Really the refinement of that compound in our wheat started in the 1880s as we went to steel grinding instead of stone grinding our wheat. But then it got really ridiculous in the post-World War II area as we went to Wonder Bread and all these really high gluten foods. And gluten, it turns out, acts through a pathway in the gut that stimulates zonulin, which is the same toxin that cholera produces to create watery diarrhea and death. The gluten is a slow-motion cholera, if you will. But gluten's been in the diet for thousands of years and pretty well tolerated. The purification of it makes it more toxic. But it was really the creation of something in the 1970s that really changed the whole paradigm of gluten, and that was a chemical called glyphosate. That was engineered by a company called Monsanto, and that got packaged as a compound called Roundup. And Roundup became the most common weed killer. You remember the 1980s, the Super Bowl commercials with guys marching out into their driveways with backpacks of Roundup to spray down a couple of dandelions. Dandelions, as it turns out, are superfoods that kill cancer, but that's a side story. If we go back to the Roundup thing, we started dumping Roundup into our water municipal systems through residential use. So we're spraying it on our lawns, we're spraying it on our driveways, we're accumulating it in our water system. Then we did something amazing, which was added to our factory farming in massive quantities in the 1990s. And we did that through two methods. In 1992, we started the practice of spraying wheat to kill it right before it's harvested. And it increased the yield as the wheat would lay down after being sprayed, and it would die from the Roundup and would be taken up easier by the machines that would harvest the wheat. And so they increased yield in the harvesting process. The practice of that has logarithmically increased over the last few decades to a point where we have hundreds of thousands of acres being sprayed with glyphosate every year now. And so it turns out that glyphosate, this chemical in Roundup, is about 10 times more potent toxin to the tight junction as gluten. And so if you add those two pieces together, you really get a lot of toxicity going on. And so here's the slide that really captures the whole story. You got gluten and glyphosate, and these are toxic peptides that then start to stimulate this zonulin production here. Bacteria and yeast overgrowth actually produce another series of toxic peptides in the overgrowth process that speed this up. All of those produce zonulin. Zonulin then leads to tight junction breakdown through the whole body. And so what starts as a gut insult then becomes a tight junction insult throughout the blood vessel tree, the blood-brain barrier, and you've got not just leaky gut, but you also got chronic inflammation and leaky brain. And this is where the autism story really comes in, and the rest of the neurologic conditions. Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, all of these are coming back to tight junction injuries in that blood-brain barrier, leading to central nervous system inflammation, leading to dysregulation of normal neural function there. And so autism is just the very earliest precursor to this effect. Restore and all those carbon carbon snowflakes that are in that compound there, they stimulate the enzymes that break down the toxic peptides, including gluten, and they stimulate an enzyme that destroys zonulin. So at two different points, these carbon molecules really block the toxicity of our diet, whether it's glyphosate or gluten or the bacterial yeast overgrowth. This system of that's stimulated by Restore is stimulating the production from bacteria of these protective mechanisms to block this whole toxic breakdown of the tight junction. And so this is what we can show in the lab. These are studies that we're doing here in our laboratories with Biomic Sciences. What you have here in the first bar is our control or vehicle where there's nothing added. And so this is a healthy membrane, if you will. And what you're looking at is the small intestine grown into a solid membrane. And then we measure the electrical charge across that tiny membrane. And that electrical charge is indicative of the tight junction integrity. And so as we add gluten, you can see an immediate 20-25% drop in the coherence of that protective barrier. And so that's with a single dose of gluten. That's the equivalent of about that much you'd see in a slice of pizza. And so you see this very rapid drop in that electrical potential and protective mechanism of the gut. The next line is glyphosate, and this is now at 1/10 the concentration of the gluten, so it's about 10 times more potent than gluten. But you can again create that 25% drop. These are levels of glyphosate and gluten that are common in our diet. These are at about 10 parts per million of glyphosate. That would be typical of a municipal water system, or that would be seen in a typical piece of food. The glyphosate and gluten together is the last bar there. You can see the synergy between those two toxins as you lose almost 80% of the integrity of that membrane with both of those toxins present. This is what it looks like under a microscope. This is immunohistochemistry. On the left, you can see a control group of that intestinal membrane. The green is highlighting the tight junctions that are keeping that membrane integral and firewall there. On the right, you can see the gluten that would be seen in a single slice of pizza taking its effect. This is taking about 18 hours after eating that pizza slice, if you will. This is not in the human gut, this is in a petri dish, but we'll wait that 18 hours out as a digestive process would mature. And what you can see now is there's huge gaps between the cells, and the green lines have turned into green dots. You've now reabsorbed trillions of damaged tight junctions. The cells have reabsorbed those proteins, and now you have no contiguous membrane. You've got these large gaps between the cells. This is the picture of leaky gut under the microscope. The good news is we can repair all of that damage from gluten glyphosate quite rapidly. And so in these petri dishes, this is what it looks like. And so if you take the control membranes on the left there, and then you add the herbicide, your glyphosate there, you get that 80% drop. This is at higher concentrations now, where we're really testing the resilience of Restore to see how much it can do. And so at higher concentrations with just the herbicide alone, you get an 80% drop of the integrity. If you add back Restore, at that point you get a complete recovery of the tight junction membrane, and you get that electrical charge right back up. And that starts within minutes of adding the Restore. We've also done the subsequent study in which you add Restore and the herbicide at the same time, and you get the same result. Not only do you block all the toxicity of that herbicide on the tight junction, you actually, in both cases, end up with a better membrane than you had to start with. Same thing has been done with the gluten. The gluten is added, and it's not as toxic as the herbicide there, but you get about 20% drop. If you add Restore at the same time, you protect it from that drop, and you actually do end up better than you did at baseline. So in both high-dose glyphosate as well as high-dose gluten, you can ameliorate or completely block that tight junction effect. That's, again, through the zonulin pathway and all of that. So this is a picture of how that Restore really blocks that whole toxin pathway to protect the tight junction and rebuild the membrane integrity and firewall protection system that's natural to the body. Here's what that recovery looks like under the microscope. Again, up in the left-hand corner now is the control. On the right-hand upper is your gluten toxicity and the damage to the tight junctions. If you look down now under both situations, you're showing the recovery with your control membrane plus Restore. You end up with these really bright tight junction lines that have no breaks in them. And then in the gluten one on the right, you get a complete recovery of those gaps in the cells and a rebuilding that tight junction system that is, again, better than it was at control. It's a really exciting, fast thing, and this is what's really given us all the attention to restore this science here. Many scientists have been looking at tight junctions, and many scientists have recognized the underlying leaky gut, leaky brain effect of many disease processes. But this is the first compound on the market, pharmaceutical or nutraceutical or otherwise, that's ever been able to show this kind of efficacy at the tight junction membrane. So that's why we've won the awards and gotten all the attention that we've had so far, is really these slides showing the exciting mechanism of really getting at the root cause of inflammation. So turning our attention a little bit more, once again, to the autism thing. So you just saw gut under the microscope there. You can imagine the same thing happening as that zonulin goes systemic. So if you eat a piece of pizza that's been made with wheat that has both rich in gluten and was sprayed with glyphosate before consumption, or if that pizza has cheese on it, which is going to have really high levels of glyphosate, all the dairy products and milk products, including, unfortunately, human breast milk, all consolidates that glyphosate compound in there. And so a piece of pizza is probably public enemy number one as far as glyphosate load and tight junction toxicity. And so as you eat that piece of pizza, zonulin is produced at very high levels and goes systemic. And zonulin then is going to tear apart any tight junction membrane, most notably for your children, the tight junctions of the blood-brain barrier. And so that's how that 1-2 punch happens. Gut injury, zonulin produced locally from toxin pathway, zonulin then goes systemic, and you've got tight junction injury all over the body. The blood-brain barrier has about 3 to 4 times the density, in some cases 9 times the density of tight junctions as your gut. And there's 3 levels to it: the tight junction up front, and then the astrocytes, which kind of are the immune system of the brain, are sitting right behind that. And so as the astrocytes are hit with all kinds of stuff from the bloodstream that should have never been in the brain, inflammation ensues in the brain. And as those astrocytes start to suffer and you get oxidative stress in the brain, you start to get neurologic misfiring. And so this is where you can see happening in your kids in real time. When they get overloaded with sensory input, their brain literally is short-circuiting with this amount of static and interference going on from the chronic oxidative stress in the brain. And so sensory processing of the whole autism spectrum disorder gamut there is all going to be tying back to this chronic inflammation of the brain. And it's a really profound thing, obviously, for those kids to experience, and it's intense as a parent to be trying to support a child who's suffering that sort of chaos in the brain. This is the tantrums, the outbursts emotionally, the staring off into space, all these different kind of neurologic events, many of you with children with seizure disorders, etc. All of these conditions are really part and parcel of this huge sieve, leakiness going on, chronic inflammation, whole mess going on in the brain. If we step back from the autism group, we actually find out that all of us in the population are now suffering some degree of inflammation through the whole system, through the same leaky gut, leaky brain spectrum. And so if you look at that population in my clinic, if I have young kids coming in clinic, I can diagnose attention deficit and mild sensory processing defects in often 1 in 4 of the children in the clinic. If I have a teenager showing up between the ages of 10 and 15, anxiety disorders are rampant. Between ages of 15 and 25, I'm seeing massive amounts of major depression in those young adults. By the end of your 20s into your 30s, I'm seeing insulin resistance and early diabetes, infertility, condition called polycystic ovarian syndrome, now 1 in 4 women. It's just really devastating those young adults. By the time we're in our 30s and 40s, we're manifesting diabetes. By the time we're into our 50s and 60s, we're vascular disease. If we survive our heart attacks and don't have a stroke, we move on to having cancer by our 50s, 60s, 70s. And now we're at 1 in 2 hitting cancer numbers. So it's really not just our artistic community that's facing this leaky gut, leaky brain phenomenon. It's really all of us. And I think many of the mothers that I met in Chicago could really relate to this term leaky brain, because as a parent, all of us are faced with so much multitasking and everything else that a day can absolutely take us to the turf with total exhaustion and fatigue setting in by late afternoon, early afternoon, and we're all suffering that leaky brain experience. So not just the kids suffering here. So USA ranking 49th in the world in health outcomes, and there's so many diseases to look at. But what we saw at Autism One in Chicago is that you guys, you mothers, and your children with autism, I think really are the spark that's going to turn this whole paradigm around. The scientists that we met there at Chicago were second to none. The outside-the-box thinkers that are there, the incredible resources that you guys have called in, that's really through your determination that you're going to find a solution that called us there, I believe. And I think you guys are calling in our success and our piece of your puzzle by your determination to find this out in the universe, some option for your children. And that spark is enough to really turn an industry. We're excited about our science at Restore and how it helps human health, but we're really excited that it takes the science right to our factory farming and pharmaceutical industries to say we've got to make some systemic changes if we're going to stem the tide of this disease. We can't make enough Restore to treat the entire world that needs it. And so it's right now a Band-Aid that we're going to use to get things up and running until we completely change our societal structure. And so we are excited that all of you are joining our team in a lot of ways to get this information out there, because the science of Restore is exciting in the short run for you to start using this in your families and see benefit from it. But how much more exciting for us to really start to cause major systemic changes in the way that we do business in the United States and far beyond as we start to take responsibility for our planet again and really the ecology message there. I want to turn now to a few slides that really focus on your experience as an autistic parent and just what to expect as you start going after these health solutions for you. But an interesting concept that I've really recently kind of coined is this first and second birth of our children. The first conception is really around the human conception that happens with the sperm and the egg combining, and you get 70 trillion human cells making a beautiful embryo that will turn into a fetus, and that fetus into an incredible child would turn into an adult and change the world. That human has 25,000 genes. The second birth or conception is really around the bacteria then. The second conception happens in a healthy environment from the mother's vaginal canal through a normal vaginal birth. Unfortunately, 49% of our births in this country are now by C-section, which means the baby never sees mom's bacteria. Instead, it inherits the hospital bacteria. And so that second inheritance that should have come from mom is now coming from hospitals by and large. Mom also is often, even with vaginal delivery, being hit by antibiotics, often for anything from the B viruses on down, the strep Bs and things like that. But antibiotic usage and just our food chain in general is stripping mom of her normal bacteria. So in the second conception of all of this bacteria, our children are deficient from the get-go. And the number of genes are really telling here. So 25,000 human genes, but if you look at your bacterial gene biome of 30,000 species, and then 1.4 quadrillion cells on your body in a healthy biome, that's going to represent about 2 million genes. And so 2 million genes versus 25,000 genes is really starting to give us just a profound story of how important your bacteria are to everything that happens in your body. This advents a whole story on microRNA and genetics. It turns out that your 25,000 genes are turned on and off by the gene output of your bacteria. And so the microRNA are these little non-coding regions of the genome that don't make any proteins or enzymes, but they act as factors, cofactors in the bloodstream and of the DNA that turn on and off other genes. So your children may have 99.999% genetic similarity to their sibling, but they have autism and the sibling doesn't. That effect, that massive difference, has first to do with kind of a perfect storm that happened at the tight junctions, but then the downstream effects from the epigenetics as the bacteria got off, the inflammation started, the whole snowballing of neural inflammation happens, and then you literally get these microRNAs where their genome is literally turning genes off that are working in their sibling, but not working in them. And that's recognized increasingly to be coming from the microRNA that are being produced in your gut. Some 15% of the microRNA in circulation in a human is not from the human, but it's from the bacteria. And so those on-off switches from abnormal gut are literally turning off the genes in your children. And the amazing thing is those genes can turn back on. And so the facial structure of an autistic kiddo is actually very, very similar across the board. And so oftentimes, if you see 10 or a dozen autistic kids, they'll look more alike than they do to their siblings. And so they have features in the facial structure that are both nutritional deficiencies and these genetic switches that are happening because of their gut biome. As we fix that, we literally see, as we fix the genome of the gut, you can literally see your child's face change over time, over the years that follow. The dark eye circles under the autistic kiddo's eyes and everything else, those can fade really quite rapidly. You can see a plumping of the face, you can see the pink cheeks come back, a really much different face coming into that child in the years following healthy intervention. And so that's a really spectacular thing to realize, that as damaged as your children may feel and look right now, and the amount of damage your doctors may be saying is there neurologically or whatever, all of that, I really want you to know and believe as mothers that all bets are off as to their potential to heal. Nobody's really given these kids the opportunity to heal completely. And that's what we're excited to be a piece of your puzzle and really pursuing that optimal health for your children still. And they can change not just the gut, but really their entire genome can be transformed. So the evolution of your autistic spectrum is really around this whole process. Children are being born with too little bacteria, then they're consuming breast milk and dairy products early in life that are contaminated with glyphosate. There Moms Across America is another great nonprofit group that was the first to do the breast milk study, showed that up to 1,600 times the EPA allowed levels of drinking water are showing up in breast milk with this glyphosate compound. So it's really the first study to show that we could bioaccumulate glyphosate in our bodies, and unfortunately that's happening at the breast and ending up in breast milk. I don't want you to hear that and stop breastfeeding if you are breastfeeding. Breastfeeding's got critical things about delivering an immune system to your child. It just means we need to protect against that glyphosate. And so in our clinic, we actually use Restore in like half dropperfuls before breastfeeding to help protect against that glyphosate effect in tight junctions. But without the Restore, that leaky gut is happening at a very, very early age in these kiddos. And that toxicity kind of builds, and as you get the leaky gut, they start absorbing things from their food chain and from breast milk that should have never been absorbed. So even kale, rich in copper and wonderful micronutrients, can become relatively toxic because the kid is absorbing nutrients without any moderation or without any intelligent absorption quality to the gut. Instead, just everything leaks right in. And so this is how these children become mineral toxic, heavy metal toxic. It's not because they're eating too much mercury, it's just that whatever trace amounts of mercury are in anything, it's going to show up in the bloodstream because of the leaky gut phenomenon. Widespread immune dysfunction then setting up, dysbiosis, all of this that we've already talked about, vulnerability to the invasive bacteria, the fungi, the molds, all of this leading to shutdown of the antioxidant system, leading to chronic inflammation, and you get total system overwhelm. In your autistic child, you all are exquisitely aware of what this looks like on a daily basis. And so that system overwhelm is really the story that is emerging. So what can we do about it? So we've already shown you what Restore does to those tight junctions, rebuilds that firewall, and the effect is within minutes. We can actually see under three-dimensional microscopy, you can start to see the cells plumping up and changing into their three-dimensional spatial orientation within minutes of introducing Restore to a membrane. So it's really a real-time event. And you can actually feel this with your first dose of Restore. It's not unusual to have a little bit of a sense of tingling or a menthol effect as you swallow it. There is no menthol in it. There's nothing that would do that. What you're actually feeling is the increasing electrical charge across the tight membrane, not just at the gut, but also at the neural membranes beyond it. And so you can get this really nice flush kind of happening where it doesn't feel like a hot flush or anything like that, but it's more of a mild menthol kind of tingling effect as you're swallowing that first dose. And that continues to build over time. Usually after the first couple of doses, you don't detect that menthol effect anymore. But that can be one of the early signs that you're starting to change that. Once you get that tight junction system up and running and you've got your firewalls rebuilt, then we're really seeing the exciting longer-term stuff. So over the next days and weeks, you're going to see a big ecodiversity jump happen, and the bacteria are proliferating as they get their carbon redox signaling and their carbon snowflakes talking back and forth. You get this huge increase in bacterial diversity. And that diversity is coming from being back in touch with this nature. When your children breathe outside or pet their dog or whatever it is, as their ecosystem diversifies, they're going to be breathing a huge number of bacteria. And when they have Restore on board, the communication network allows them to grab these minor species and start to set up ecosystem diversity again. And so it really is starting to rebuild that biodiversity one bacteria at a time. There are no bacteria in Restore. Restore is simply the communication network between the bacteria, and it's allowing your body to absorb these natural sources of bacteria from your environment and let those get a foothold to create that biodiversity. In general, we start the Restore and then we stop a lot of the other things in the diet. How do we maximize that biome? We're going to stop the digestive enzymes in your probiotics. And the reason is that you really want to return to some normal physiology from where your food is digested to how it's digested to which bacteria are involved. If your child has responded really well to digestive enzymes and probiotics in the past, and you feel like they're still benefiting from that, there's no danger in using them both at the same time. We just think that Restore works better when it's used alone. You can certainly just taper those probiotics or taper the digestive enzymes over the first month or two of use, and there's no harm in that. So there is no drug-drug interaction. There's no need to stop anything that your child is still currently on, whether it's a medication or otherwise. It's a very easy one to start. But in general, you do stop those probiotics and digestive enzymes to allow that diversification, normal digestive process start to come back in. So eating from the bottom of the food chain is an incredibly good way to decrease your amount of glyphosate in general. Glyphosate accumulates as you go up the food chain, so your dairy, your meat are going to be higher in it. Your factory farm fish are going to be very high in it because they're fed only factory farm glyphosate-rich grains and such as feed. So the more feed that you give the animal, the more toxic they get. They bioaccumulate the glyphosate and pass that on. So the lower you eat from the food chain, I think the better you're going to do. Stopping dairy, I believe, is really a critical piece and one of the real hallmarks of what we do in our clinic. Fermented foods are really helpful. Miso soup is usually pretty well tolerated by the autistic community because you guys are used to doing bone broths and things like that, so the kiddos are used to that umami kind of flavor of the miso soup, and so that's a great one to add in. So sauerkraut and some of the other ones can be difficult to tolerate for the autistic palate sometimes, but in small doses you can start to add that back in. Making your own sauerkraut is a really good idea because you can make it very mild, where it's a lot easier to tolerate for that autistic palate initially. So what do you expect? What's in, I think I actually already answered this slide here, like what's in Restore. The active ingredient in Restore is the carbon molecules that are made by the bacteria as they digest food. And it's also got trace micronutrients, so this is what I wanted to hit on with this slide here. You guys all are very well read and researched on trace minerals, and glutamic acid and nickel and some of the other naturally occurring compounds in Restore, you guys have recognized are things that you've been told that are actually too high in autistic kids. The reason these compounds have gotten too high in autistic kids, again, we go back to the leaky gut story. It's because of the lack of a tight junction membrane that these kids became overloaded in certain nutrients. It's not because they were eating too much glutamic acid that they got glutamic acid high. The amount of glutamic acid, nickel, and all these other trace minerals and trace amino acids that we have in Restore are tiny. The magic that we found in Restore is subtlety. It turns out that the more subtle you get with this compound, the better it works. And so the trace quantities that we have in here really aren't measurable by most mechanisms that's used nutritionally. To find the minerals that we have here, you have to use mass spectrometry and some of the other really sensitive tools to measure these trace amounts. In a nutshell, what you're seeing as far as the naturally occurring minerals in Restore, it's basically the same distribution you would see in a really well-grown sweet potato skin. And so the skin of the sweet potato is going to have a very similar nutrient density. So if your children are tolerating sweet potatoes, they're going to tolerate Restore from a mineral standpoint. And so that's an important thing to realize, because when you read the ingredients on the back, it is an appropriate question to ask, why is there glutamic acid, why is there nickel? These are completely naturally occurring compounds that are in the soil, same as grown in a sweet potato. To extract those from the compound, we would have to use a chemical extraction process, and it would damage the carbon molecule structure and lose the efficacy anyways. So it has to be there, and the concentrations are tiny. Furthermore, as you fix the tight junction membrane, your child has become less toxic in everything they're toxic in. The toxicity that they're facing is really from this leaky membrane effect. So in those first hours and days, as they put that firewall back up, the amount of minerals and anything else you've been used to having to avoid become far less toxic, and their body's able to start really catching up with the detox process. All right. I want to hit on the Restore logistics real quick. 1 teaspoon 3 times daily before meals is our goal dose for our autistic community, as with our adult population that are healthy. but that is not necessarily where you want to start. A lot of your autistic kids are very sensitive to just about anything you do. If you feel like everything you've ever tried to help your autistic kid with, they respond to an extreme degree, and everything is, goes way beyond your expectations as far as the speed or intensity of side effects or anything else, there is really no importance of speed here. And the efficacy of Restore really starts at tiny, tiny doses. And so for your sensitive kids and for your infants, underage 1, things like that, we'll start 5 drops by mouth under the tongue, or you can also put that into water. You can put it in a non-chlorinated water or juice. Some of our moms have mixed that in applesauce and other things that are in the kids' diet already. In the event that you have a kiddo that's really adverse to putting a spoon in their mouth with a little bit of Restore in it. The Restore is a pretty benign flavor. If you taste the Restore, if you're tasting kind of reactive stuff, we get a broad spectrum of people saying it tastes like everything from kind of minerally flavor to burnt plastic to all kinds of weird descriptions that they can come up with. Those really reactive are not actually the Restore. It's the chemical reaction of all these reductants or negative charges in the carbon molecules, these carbon snowflakes. If you're very acidic or inflamed, then you might taste that minerally or kind of plasticky type smell to the compound. After 3 to 5 days of using it, you'll see that it starts to return to just a mild salt, mild mineral type flavor. It's very neutral compared to most of the supplements on the market. So usually really well tolerated by mouth, but if you need to hide it in the food, you certainly can. In general, we like it before the meal simply because if you do that tight junction repair before they eat, then they're going to regulate the flow of all the minerals and everything else from their food better. But again, it does do repair. So if you forget to give it before the meal, certainly give it after the meal or with the meal to speed the repair of those tight junctions up. Once on Restore, you can stop the probiotics and digestive enzymes, as we already mentioned, and speed up that recovery of the natural gut biome diversity and healthy digestive process. There are no drug-drug interactions. The wonderful thing about these tiny little carbon molecules made by the bacteria is they don't require liver metabolism or kidney metabolism to go systemic and become effective. And so most of the pharmaceuticals on the market are all liver digested or liver metabolized. Some of them are kidney metabolized. We do not disrupt any of those pathways. If your kiddo is on something that requires blood levels be checked, so something like Dilantin, which is a seizure medication, or blood thinner, which would be really rare, but if they happen to have some blood disorder or something like that. But if your doctor is used to checking blood levels of a medication, while there are no drug-drug interactions, their gut is about to get healthy. And so as their gut health improves, you might want to have your doctor, within a month or 2 of starting Restore, go ahead and recheck the medication levels that they're used to checking anyways, because their digestion is going to improve and their absorption may improve, and you want to just keep an eye on those medications in the event that they're on something that needs blood monitoring. But no drug-drug interactions to be concerned about. So what to expect in your child when you start Restore? In the first week, changes in the bowel habits are the most common to be reported. Short term, you can see looser stools. Most autistic kids are already having a mix of real gassy, loose, watery stools, or the opposite spectrum, which are really hard, pebbly stools. There's usually an almost immediate improvement in these within 2 to 3 days. And so your autistic kid bowel is so messed up that you usually only see improvement in that first week. But if you as a mother who's less inflamed and has less leaky gut than your kiddo, you may develop actually changes in bowel habits that seem a little bit worse. You get a little bit of diarrhea or loose stools, or you get some mild constipation. Those are just indicative of both tight junction changes. As your tight junctions repair, you get that firewall. You now can absorb water well. If you're dehydrated, you can get that mild constipation going, slow transit time. And so that's kind of what to expect and how to put it into play. Improved speech and sensory processing. This can be surprisingly fast. And this is not Restore healing your child. This is your child healing themselves. And so everything that happens after the tight junctions, this is your kiddo. This is your kiddo turning back on. This is your kid starting a normal healing process in play. And so Restore is not built to treat or diagnose or any of the FDA stuff they worry about us claiming. We're not here to treat autism. We're simply fixing tight junction and giving back your kiddo a normal biome over time. And that allows the kid to go into the really exciting process of healing. And that's something they just haven't been able to quite catch up with in their lifetime to date. So improved speech and sensory processing even in the first day to 2 days after the product. A lot of kids already from Autism 1 who've been on it. We already have lots and lots of case reports floating out from you guys We've been treating autistic families for almost 3 years in our clinic here, and I've seen really dramatic improvements in cognition and sensory processing. Speech patterns can improve as little as 2 to 3 days, where a kid who's nonverbal can start to say words, or a kid who's says 1 or 2 words starts stringing all those together into coherent sentences suddenly. So all of those have been seen, and even in the last 2 weeks since Autism 1, there's lots of you already experiencing those effects. It seems too good to be true, and it's hard to get your hopes up, especially when they've been dashed many times before. But again, this isn't Restore being some sort of magic pill. This is Restore just putting up the front wall of defense again, and your kid is now healing in a fashion that they haven't had a chance to do. So the decreased hyperactivity often seen in the first 2 weeks, and then 3, 4, 5 weeks out, you start to see the improved nutritional appearance, where the circles under the eyes reduce, pink cheeks start to return. They start to look more like their siblings than they do to other autistic children. And that really accelerates over the next 6 to 12 months of use as they start to really change their body type, their bone development, their facial structure, their overall growth rate, all of those things really improving as the inflammation in their body continues to recede. Improved sleep is often seen pretty quickly when the inflammation starts to settle down. Those tight junctions go back up. Improved sleep patterns for your children, that's always a good sign, and that's an exciting thing to go. Neural differentiation and development, it's worth noting, is going to continue to improve for a full 7 years. There will be full 7 years of changes in the neurons that currently exist in that kiddo. And so years and years of improved differentiation. If your kid is before puberty, that's really an exciting moment. Really, anytime before age 18, we're in very fast dendritic sprouting in those puberty years. And so when you stop the inflammation, you get your barrier back up and the kid starts to heal, they still have an amazing amount of dendritic sprouting and new neural connections to be made and everything else in the learning process. So the amount of recovery, I think, is going to be unprecedented as we fast forward 7, 10, 15 years down the road in these autistic kids who have been treated with Restore. So that's a really long-term process. Empathy is an interesting one. We've seen this not just in autistic kids, but in schizophrenic kids. We had a schizophrenic here at clinic who was very violent, institutionalized schizophrenic, got a hold of Restore and drank a whole bottle in 3 days. There is no toxicity to Restore. You can take 100%, you can drink a bottle a day, and it's not going to cause any harm other than maybe you're having so many bowel movements because you have so many bacteria that you're booming away there. But he drank a whole bottle in 3 days and went from this completely violent, unfocused, non-communicative human being to coming in about, I think it was 6 weeks later was his follow-up visit with our Dr. Katz here, and he sat down after waiting quietly in our waiting room for 45 minutes with his mother, and they came into the exam room and sat down, and after a simple question, I was going, this young 19-year-old went into this whole description on empathy, and he had, since starting Restore, discovered empathy and felt a great amount of sorrow for his mother and what she had endured in dealing with his behavior over the years, and it must be a very moving time for a very tearful mother and everything else to listen to a child speak on empathy. But we've seen that in autistic children too, where they go from sensory processing overload and they're just overwhelmed by everything to finding self, and then once finding self, being able to look out into the world and appreciate and have empathy for others around them. But all of that's very exciting, and it will be moving for you to see that. But in reality, we should also say that it doesn't fix everything. So what Restore won't do for your child is completely end tantrums. It's not going to make them eat their vegetables. It's not going to clean up the dishes after them. So the tiredness of the mom at the end of the day is going to be tired no matter what we do here. But we do hope to give all of you just a bit of a breather and just a real sense of hope and light at the end of the tunnel as you guys start to use this resource for yourselves over time. I think we're running out of time pretty quickly here. But I do want to close on here is that right after Autism 1, our little team went up to another conference up in Detroit, and we saw the mural that's by Diego Rivera. It was commissioned by the Ford Motor Company, and one of the most stunning things jumped out at us here. This wall is depicting the toxicity and dangers of the Industrial Revolution. In the upper left-hand corner is a depiction of mustard gas bombs being produced. And then in the middle bottom panel is the Ford production plant and the industry of building these amazing roads and road systems and cars and everything else. And then the upper right panel is a dark room with some sinister-looking characters working over a cauldron, and then a Christ-like looking child in the front. And what this is depicting is one of the first vaccinations. And it's quite stunning that the mustard gas would be on one side and the vaccinations on the other. It was overwhelming for us after coming back from autism, wanting to see this mural and just think, did Diego Rivera see something of the future here of the Industrial Revolution, creating toxins in our environment that would hurt our children and would lead to really major deficits in human health. But sitting between those two panels is two mothers, two mothers who are supposed to be the original mothers of Earth, and there's two others on the back wall behind the photographer here. So there's four of these mothers. And in the hands that are depicted on these mothers, and the hands that are coming up behind them are these rocks, and they're crushing rocks. And below them, you can see those rocks turning into layers of mineral. And it turns out that the lignite that is where we extract restore from is exactly that process of soil being crushed down and turn into these fossil layers of soil. And that's what we're actually extracting restore. So in one mural from the 1930s, we're seeing a prediction of the toxicity of the Industrial Revolution, and ironically, one of the major solutions for it, which is the magic of soil and the bacteria that were thriving in that soil 50 million years ago. They've been storing away an antidote to the toxicity that we would create, and would really change the health of the human form. So really a powerful tool and an incredible thing. I'm going to end on that site. We do want you guys to have access to Restore. There'll be an ongoing sale for you guys over time. Our team will be working closely with the leadership of MR to get you all that information. There's going to be a coupon code that you'll enter on the website that is TMR15, and that will get you into the website and allow you to purchase at that discounted thing. There's also a subscription that you can start to look for on the website to discount it further, but those are some avenues to getting Restore in hand. The exciting thing for us is that you guys are accelerating our growth to the point where you guys are actually educating faster than we're educating. And so you guys as educators are spreading the word so fast that we're already seeing a massive uptick in sales and production. And so we're keeping up with that. We're excited for growth. We are excited to have you guys on our team. We're a family-run company. We're growing through grassroots channels. We're not a pharmaceutical company, and so our scaling of the product is steady, and we have to match it closely with our demand. So there may be weeks where we're a little bit back ordered, but we are very rapidly meeting demand and coming up to speed, and we're excited to have you guys on the team and be spreading it from our store.
All right, Dr. Bush, it's Helen Conroy. I have a massive list of questions for you. Do you have a little time to answer some?
I certainly do. Let's go ahead.
All right. I'm not going to answer the question. I'm not going to ask you the questions that are on ingredients, just so everybody in the audience know, because most of them refer to the things that you have already explained about, copper, glutamic acid, and things like that. But there is one question, and that is, what if you're allergic to nickel? Can you take Restore?
Yeah, so if your child is tolerating normal nutritional levels of your greens and sweet potatoes and things like that, all of those are going to have trace nickel in them. So if you're tolerating a normal diet with your sweet potatoes and everything else, then you're going to be able to tolerate Restore there.
Okay, great. The next question is, can Restore help OCD or anxiety?
Yes, so again, those are kind of an outspring of the leaky brain effect and are common in non-autistic individuals as well, and common among parents. But yeah, all of us can appreciate these brain inflammation. Again, Restore is not treating any particular disorder. It's simply giving you back those front defenses that allow for normal neural processing to happen. And so any of those conditions that I listed on that long slide that watches inflammation across the lifetime, and the improvement, not because it's treating the condition, but because the Restore is really giving you back the defenses that allow you to go into that full process.
Okay. We heard you talk about dairy. Someone had a question, is raw dairy okay?
Your microphone's breaking up there, Helen. I can't quite hear you.
We heard you talk about dairy. Someone had a question about raw dairy and if that was any better or if it was okay.
Gotcha. Yeah, so dairy in general, including that raw breast milk, is going to be one of the areas that we believe is going to be bioaccumulating the highest levels of glyphosate. So do not encourage the use of raw milk for avoiding glyphosate. If you really want your child to stay on dairy, then you're definitely going to want to pre-treat that meal with Restore before they get that dairy into their system. But there's a lot of other issues with dairy. Our gut really is not at all made to handle cow's milk. Cow's milk is designed for a four-stomach calf, and grow that calf from a 40-pound foal to a 600-pound bull in 6 months. So that kind of nutritional pattern of cow's milk is really not designed for the human growth patterns or the human gut.
Okay. What if a kid has, I can't say this, but pyroluria, and the product has copper? Is that going to be okay?
Yeah, again, the copper in this is tiny amounts. It's the same as the nickel stored here. If you're tolerating sweet potatoes and the like, you're not going to see any problems with the copper. And then the neat thing about the copper and the glutamic acid and the nickel and all the compounds in this is those are totally critical pieces for neural development, enzyme function. You can go on and on. These compounds that you previously thought were kind of toxic to your child, they're actually critical pieces of normal health. It's just that the dysregulation of these leaky membranes has led to an abnormal toxicity of these compounds previously. But within days of taking Restore and getting those tight junctions up and running, your kiddos will be tolerating a whole host of things that they haven't tolerated before. But trace amounts of copper, beneficial only, not going to be any problems with H. pylori or any other.
Okay. We started Restore. My child's aggression has gone through the roof. What's going on?
Yeah, so you can see the whole spectrum here. And again, we're fixing tight junctions, and as those tight junctions repair, you're going to see the whole gamut happen behind that. In general, if you feel like things are going too fast, too furious, you go back to that 5 drops under the tongue once a day or twice a day, and then slowly increase it to a teaspoon 3 times a day. But what's likely happening there is your child is going from complete information overload, where they're almost shut down and acting out when they can, to where as the inflammation is starting to settle down, they're acting out in handling the information that's coming into their brain at that time. And so whatever happens now is going to certainly be different in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 3 months down the road. So as neurologic function starts to turn back on, as inflammation settles down, you can see the whole gamut. You can see tantrums. You can see, we've seen some interesting videos on three-dimensional space. So kids who were previously walking can suddenly start to walk differently. Their gait changes. They can go into these geometric walking patterns where they're trying to sensory process completely different. You can literally see their brains rewiring often, where the way they used to see the world is suddenly changing. And they're seeing detail, and they're seeing structural orientation and motion completely different than they ever have. And so it can absolutely be an overwhelming thing. And so slow and steady usually wins the game. If you feel like your kid's having too much overload or going through too much neurologic shift, just slow it down. 5 drops a day under the tongue, slow that process down. Depending on the behavior, you also might want to just power through it and not slow down the dose. If it's behavioral outbursts and stuff like that, it may be worth just going and press for a couple weeks on the teaspoon 3 times a day, get over that, let them get enough neurologic processing going where they can get over the hump there and get towards their behavioral improvement and stuff like that.
Okay. Does Restore kill parasites?
Oh, this is a really good question. So it turns out that the bacteria of your gut can produce antiparasitics, antivirals, all kinds of beneficial stuff happens when you start getting the communication network up and going with Restore. It is not unusual at all to see spontaneous parasite clearance. Again, the Restore is not directly treating the parasites. Instead, the bacteria of the gut are treating the parasites. So it's a pretty amazing phenomenon that the intelligent gut biome is capable of ridding itself of things. But pinworm is quite common. Your children are often exposed to pinworm in daycare settings, etc. Those are tiny little like half-inch white worms. Not unusual to suddenly see a toilet bowl full of pinworms 2-3 weeks into Restore use. We've seen some roundworms and things like that. If you do see worms, the pinworms are usually done. They clear, they're done. If you have roundworms pass, I would bring that up to your pediatrician. use a holistic approach to that, using the wormwood, black walnut oil, and clove as a single tincture that's available at most of your health food stores. To use that regimen there in children to clear parasites if there's any question of persistent parasite.
Okay. Is it heat stable? Can you hide it in foods like Jell-O?
It's heat stable in most cases. I think that, again, you're going to probably be better off. Something like Jell-O has got enough insults in there with the dyes and stuff like that that I'd feel much more comfortable with a mother pre-treating the gut with Restore before that Jell-O hits the meal. But if that's the only way you're going to get into your kiddo, certainly do it. But ideally, you'd be getting a clean teaspoon of Restore into a glass of water or something like that before the meal, rather than integrated into something that we know has some things we wish weren't there.
Does the product help with pica, specifically kids who want to eat dirt?
Yeah, pica or pica is an interesting condition there, and I think what you'll see is it absolutely does help. The rate at which that helps will be very highly variable. I think that you'll see that anywhere from days to weeks may be enough to start to change that behavior, but certainly months and years out would be much different. Pica is thought to be a nutritional deficiency trigger, coupled with neurologic sensory processing deficits. So pica is common actually well, not common, but can occur in pregnancy and things like that as well. So interesting condition, and the kid really probably is sensing a soil deficit, if you will. And so these ancient soil extracts that we're using to find these carbon molecules are an interesting caveat for those kiddos that are intuitively drawn towards that.
Okay. There's two questions that are kind of similar. One is, can we combine with other supplements and the GAPS diet?
Yes, it works great with the GAPS diet. Many of you have had success with the GAPS diet. In our clinic, we usually just utilize a plant-based diet and don't go after bone broth as much. We more likely use the miso soups because of their biodiversity effect and things like that. Big fan of fat, though. Love the avocado and the coconut oils in the diet and all those healthy sources. The healthy seeds, hemp seed, flaxseed, all these omega-3 riches, those are great oil sources. So GAPS diet is certainly doesn't need to be stopped or anything else. The Restore is going to work with it. We use a slightly different technique in our clinic, but no need for major dietary overhaul.
Okay. Is the product peanut-free, and is it manufactured in a peanut-free facility?
It is. It's manufactured in a peanut-free facility. We actually make all of them in our own laboratories here. We don't have any third-party scientists, bottlers, producers, anything involved. This is all family-run. We do it all in our own facility. It is peanut-free. It is gluten-free. And it is also completely organic by its definition.
Okay. I think we have time for maybe one more question. And that is, I just saw a really good one. Are there tight junctions in other epithelial cells, blood vessels, for instance, and does this product affect them?
Excellent. Yeah, I think we covered that in the talk a little bit, but it's a great question to end on here. Is that the reason your autistic kiddo is improving is not just because the gut barrier is improving and the inflammation settling down in their gastrointestinal tract. It's really the tight junctions that go systemic that are probably really making the huge clinical differences so quickly. It's not unusual for our adults who have gluten sensitivity and celiac and stuff to feel their first dose and feel brain fog lift within minutes of first dose. So that's really a neurologic effect that's really got more to do with blood-brain barrier between the peripheral nerves and central nervous system, etc. And so certainly the blood-brain barrier, but also you mentioned there the blood vessel endothelial layers and all that. All of these are tight junction surfaces. We have amazing science on the kidney cells. We revealed kidney tubule tight junctions, which has never been shown to happen in petri dishes. So just tight junction anywhere in the body is going to respond beautifully to the Restores as far as all of our science has shown.
Okay, perfect.
Well, thank you, Allison.
Okay, Dr. Bush. Hi, how are you? So I'm going to wrap us up now very quickly with our second giveaway of a 32-ounce bottle of Restore, and our winner is Amanda Wilson. Congratulations. We'll be emailing you information about how to collect that. I'd like to close and say a huge thank you to Dr. Bush for your terrific presentation, and to our audience, thank you also for joining us today. To purchase Restore, please visit the Thinking Moms Revolution blog and click on the banner ad for a 15% coupon code through June 30th. So thanks so much, everybody, especially to you, Dr. Bush, and everybody take care.